Hello, and welcome to the PDA Society's podcast. We're here to chat about all things PDA to help you understand what people with this profile of autism are experiencing and how you can help. We'll be sharing research, professional expertise, and the insights of people with lived experience to help you understand PDA and have more tools to make life easier. So, whether you're a PDA yourself, a family member, friend, or professional trying to make a difference, welcome from everybody at the PDA Society. We hope you'll find this useful.
Hello, welcome to today's podcast where I'm delighted to be joined by the brilliant Clare Truman. Clare, would you like to start by introducing yourself, please?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Clare Truman, and I've been working in education since 2008. I support students at the moment who are PDA students who learn at home, so students that can't access school. But prior to that, I worked in mainstream schools, specialist schools for autistic children, and alternative provisions for PDA children. I've written a book called The Teacher's Introduction to Pathological Demand Avoidance. That's published by Jessica Kingsley Publishers. And I'm studying for a PhD at UCL London at the moment, looking at the educational experiences of PDA children and young people.
Lovely stuff. So the reason that we invited Clare here today is partly because her book's incredible, and partly because through her organisation, Spectrum Space, Clare provides distance learning packages for young people unable to access school. And she delivers training consultancy for families and professionals alike. And she is somebody who we always hear back really, really positive things about. She brings this deep theoretical grounding as well as practical insight into the conversation around PDA. And I have always found in this job and in previous roles when I've called on Clare for advice that it's been incredibly useful. And so we're really hoping that that's useful to you guys as well. So what we're going to start with is a bit of a chat about Clare's background. But before we do, I just want to set a little bit of context. Today, we are going to be talking in this podcast about why it is so important that educators understand the PDA as they're working with, and that they understand them as individuals as well as kind of conceptually. And this is so important because actually so many PDAs are out of school, are struggling in school, or are burning out. And a little bit of understanding and a little bit of flexibility from teachers can make a world of difference. So what we're hoping is that teachers listening to this find kind of some tips and some little things that they can use that help them help the PDAs in their lives, but that also it's a really useful tool for parents who are listening to share with teachers and to share some ideas from somebody who really, really has been there and knows what it's about. So Clare, would you like to start by telling us a little bit about why it is you work specifically around PDA?
Yeah, of course. So the first PDAs I met were learning in a school I worked at for autistic children. So it was a specialist school for autistic children. And there were a few students there. I had a class, but there were a few students there who couldn't access the classroom. And looking back, they were all PDAs. But I didn't really know that at the time. So I was learning through trial and error. So as well as my class, I was supporting these students who were on flexible, individualized programs. They were learning outside the classroom in their own way. And I started to sort of develop PDA strategies without realizing. Then someone pressed the Phil Christie book into my hand, and things started to make sense. So that's Phil Christie, Ruth Fiddler, Duncan and Healy, Duncan and Healy, who wrote a great introduction to PDA. And I started to realize that the strategies I was using through trial and error matched the strategies in that book. So I started learning more about PDA and thinking, this is what I'm doing. Without realizing it, this is what I'm doing. And so it was really working with that small group of students who were learning in a very different way, and finding out what worked for them that got me interested in PDA. And from there, I realized that it's such a great way to teach. Like when I went into teaching, I thought I had an image of teaching. I went to a school where sometimes the teachers wore gowns. So I was expecting to become a teacher, not necessarily wearing a gown, but become a teacher in quite a traditional Hogwarts style Professor McGonagall kind of thing. And what I found was actually I really enjoyed learning coming alongside the PDA students and learning in that facilitating learning in that child-led way that really meets their needs. And now it's so much more fun to teach that way. So yeah.
Fantastic. And so from that, you've moved into both studying and kind of creating Spectrum Space. Do you want to talk a little bit about that kind of career progression?
Yeah, the studying came first. So only just before, but the studying came first. So I was still working at the specialist school for autistic children, still working alongside these children on individual programs, and still had that one book. And I thought there must be more knowledge out there. And at the time, this was 2016 that I started. I've been doing this course since 2016, but this was 2016, and I thought there must be more knowledge out there. And I looked, and there wasn't much. There was a bit, but there really wasn't much. And so I thought, well, if there aren't books and articles out there, let's write some. So I started studying I was looking originally at a comparison between autistic children's experiences of school more generally and PDA children's experiences of school, but it's evolved a bit, and now I'm focusing very specifically on PDA. And then Spectrum Space. Spectrum Space came out of a temper tantrum. So one of the students who was on the individual program was really, really struggling. We were trying to get him back into the classroom, and looking back, that wasn't where he needed to be. And the individual program was working, but every time we tried to bring him back into the class, that wasn't meeting his needs, so it wasn't working. And he wasn't enjoying school, and it wasn't helping him learn. And in a moment of temper, I walked into my line manager's office and said, he doesn't even need a school, he just needs a life apprenticeship. And then a light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to do life apprenticeships for PDA children. So I had an alternative provision that worked specifically with PDA children for a little while, and now I do their distance learning packages for children. So that meets children wherever they are, anywhere in the country. It's delivered to their door. Education delivered to their door.
Cool. That's really interesting stuff, and I know we're going to dig into it a little bit more in the sponsors podcast. But for now, we've sort of talked about, and I've nodded along about, or maybe the classroom wasn't the right place, and about how tricky things can be for PDAs in education. But why is that? Why is education such a trigger point for difficult experiences for PDAs?
I think the way a lot of education is set up, the way a lot of schools are set up, because you're working with so many children, when I was in mainstream, I was seeing mainstream secondary, I was seeing 150 children a day. So because you're seeing 150 children a day, you have systems, and you have quite rigid systems sometimes, that with clear rewards and sanctions for different actions, you have clear rules, and you have a lot of demands. When I go in to do training and consultancy with schools, I often invite them to do an exercise where I give them a large stack of Post-it notes, and I say, write down every demand that a child encounters from the minute they cross over the threshold in your school to the end of the day. And I give them 5 minutes, and some of them get through the first lesson. You know, they're writing all these post-it notes. When I stop them after 5 minutes, some of them have got through the first lesson. No one's got to the end of the day. Some of them haven't got in off the playground for the morning bell, because there are so many demands. And I think stripping away some of those is really key. I think the students that were on individual programs, if I'd set my classroom up differently, may have come back into the classroom sooner, but I was learning on the go. And that's what I'm passionate about now as well, is making sure that as far as possible, classrooms are more PDA friendly.
Fantastic. So what about if we spend a little bit of time digging into that, we talk about kind of some of the particular examples of sensory and relational and autonomy based challenges that a child or young person might experience just by being in school before we even get to kind of participating in lessons.
Yes, I think the last one you said is probably the most important. So autonomy based challenges, I think, are the biggest ones. All three are important, but I think autonomy is first, because again, because of the 150 students, you're one person in a large group. You're one person out of 30. You're one person out of 1,000 in a large secondary school, 1,500, and your autonomy is so reduced by that. It's sort of line up, sit down in this seat, write down what's on this whiteboard, write it down in this color. And one of the first things that I try and do when I talk to schools is say, which of those things are crucially important? And can we strip some of them back? Because actually, if you looked at all the post-it notes, and I get people to do this, if you look at all the post-it notes that you've just written down, how many of them are actually essential? There are some, you know, keeping yourself safe. There are some, but lots of them are not. So I think autonomy is the biggest barrier. The lack of autonomy is the biggest barrier. Relational challenges as well, I think, arise out of that. So sometimes you can get into a battle for control. There's a phrase about PDA that it's an anxiety-driven need to remain in control. I think Phil Christie said that. And that's true, but it's not the whole story. And if we focus solely on that, and I don't think Phil Christie would, if you focus solely on that, then you can end up in a battle for control. And I think that's what happens to the relation. That's where the relationship breaks down between the teacher and the student. You're ending up in a battle for control. And if you focus instead on maximizing autonomy for the student, then you avoid that battle. And then the relationship is stronger. And sensory was the other thing you said, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And sensory challenges, I mean, sensory challenges affect many students in school. It's a noisy place. There's a lot of people in it. There are bright lights. There's a lot of movement coming and going. And so that's a challenge for a lot of children. I think one of the things that's particularly difficult for PDA is that the way people try to help them manage those sensory challenges doesn't preserve their autonomy. So traditional strategies like sensory diets, for example, a lot of my PDA students struggle with sensory diets, which are often where occupational therapists will provide a list of exercises or activities that a child or young person could use to help regulate their sensory system. And there's often a list, and it's sort of do this 3 times a day, or do this before break and after break, or there'll be a set time, a set list of activities, a set order in which they should be completed. And sometimes schools have whole rooms, specialist schools more, have whole rooms set up with a little route around the room. So you
Okay.
do the activities in a set order and they're laid out that way. And there are good occupational therapy reasons for that, for the order of the activities. But I find that strategy is a barrier for PDA students because it's too demanding. And so I took those activities when I was working in schools, took those activities and created sensory menus so the students could pick which activities that they were doing in which order. There's a slight disadvantage from an occupational therapy perspective in mixing up the order like that, but the preservation of the autonomy means that strategy then works.
Means that some of the things get done.
Something gets done that regulates the sensory system. So I think the sensory challenges that PDAs experience are similar to those experienced by other autistic children, other children, but what helps is so different that sometimes it seems like nothing helps. And actually, if we adapt the strategies, something helps.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I always find myself thinking when I'm chatting with families and with teachers is also that it's really important to understand that our current conception of PDA is that it's a profile of autism, and that means that you're experiencing your demand avoidance and you're experiencing all of the other things that come with being an autistic person, which means that if that light over there is flickering, then no amount of autonomy in your room is going to help you until that light's been switched off. And I think there's something kind of important about teachers and parents not sort of going it's one or it's the other, but kind of saying, what is this human being experiencing in this situation and what can I do to help? Because actually the two things can make one another feel a lot worse if you've got no autonomy at all in a situation and your sensory sensitivities are being kind of stretched and pulled in different directions. It's unbearable. And sometimes just walking over and switching off a light is the kindest thing you can be doing for a person. And I think it's just worth kind of remembering both of those things. I love that thing about a sensory menu, though. I hadn't heard of sensory diets before. So that's a new one for me. Thank you for explaining it so well. What about misunderstanding and misdiagnosis in schools? And I think probably it's worth saying here that PDA Society welcomes all educators into any kind of podcast, any information sharing, anything we do, whether you believe PDA is a thing or not. You're really, really welcome. Because often whether or not PDA is a thing becomes an argument, doesn't it, in schools, rather than what does this human being in front of me need? And so could you talk me through kind of what can happen in terms of misunderstanding and misdiagnosis within schools?
Yes, and I can start it with a confession because I used to do this. But before I understood anything about PDA, I remember we used to divide what we saw. So the actions that a child was taking, we used to divide those as teachers in the staff room into making choices and reacting in a way that you have limited control over.
Yeah.
So we used to say, in that situation, this student is making a choice not to do X, Y, Z, or making a choice to say that, do that. And there's an element of choice in everything we do. But what I didn't understand was that, and I understand better now, is that for PDA children, you sometimes hear the expression, it's can't, not won't. So sometimes for the PDA children, oftentimes for the PDA children I was working with, they couldn't follow the demand or the instruction. They couldn't follow my instruction at that point because of the way I'd presented it, because of the weight of the demand, because their tolerance for demands was really low. They couldn't follow that instruction not they were making a choice not to follow the instruction. And we used to say it in the staff room, oh, he's choosing, she's choosing. We can put in these rewards and sanctions because they're choosing. But it wasn't choosing. And I think that's a misunderstanding that happens quite a lot. I think especially during the recovery period, if something's gone wrong and there's been a breakdown in a relationship and maybe between teacher and student, and maybe there's been some distressed behaviour as well that's maybe been unsafe or caused a problem in the classroom, then in that recovery moment, so when everything's settled down and we're trying to repair the relationship and someone's coming back to calm, the PDA is coming back to calm. In that recovery moment, I used to hear a lot of, see, he was choosing because he's fine now. And that would break that relationship again. And we'd be back in a anxious situation for everyone involved, the PDA and me. So understanding that something has happened because a demand was too much, and then repairing the relationship and reducing the anxiety is what needs to happen next, not telling someone they made a choice and they need to make a different choice next time. And I did that. I did things like that. But I understand a bit more now about not doing that.
So from a teaching point of view, if we've got a teacher listening to this who is in a mainstream secondary school and so is seeing that 150 kids a day, how do you go about making a judgment call about whether what you've just experienced in your classroom is a choice or not, and does it matter? Because what I'm imagining is a teacher who probably hasn't had a chance to read whatever is on a child's statement, if they have a statement. Goodness, education, health and care plan, that just showed my age.
I didn't want to say anything, Ed, but
education, health and care plan, if they're lucky enough to have one, and they're just faced with a behaviour. How do they know whether or not it's a choice, and does it matter?
I think at first you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
If you're working with a child that you don't know well, or a young person that you don't know well, I think you don't know at the beginning. So you have to have a curious attitude about what's just happened.
Mm.
So the goal is to get everyone as calm as possible, as quickly as possible. And for most children, I would say, possibly all children, an immediate sanction or an immediate instruction to calm down is not the best way to get everyone as calm as quickly as possible. So at first, I think it doesn't matter. Respond with curiosity and reduce the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And by respond with, I haven't really explained that. By respond with curiosity, I mean, I'm not doing that work. Thank you for telling me. I'm going to get everyone else started, and then I'm coming to find out why not. So that's the curiosity.
Mm.
So you're not making a promise either way. You're not saying you don't
Yeah.
have to. You're not saying you must. You're saying, I'm going to get everyone else started, and then I'm coming out to find out why. You're buying yourself time apart from anything else, but
Yeah.
you're also opening a conversation rather than shutting one down. So then you can find out in the discussion a little bit more about whether it's a choice or not. Even if it is, sometimes that doesn't matter. So, for example, if everyone's writing about the Tudors to show me that they can do capital letters and full stops, and someone says, I'm not writing about the Tudors, and I find out why not. And I don't know whether someone's sort of really can't cope with that demand or is just had enough of the Tudors because I've been talking about it for a week. It doesn't really matter. I need them to show me full stops and capital letters. Maybe there's some flexibility. We can write about what we want. And a lot of the strategies that I put in my book actually can be applied to more than just the PDAs in the room. So I used to have a little line on the bottom of my worksheets that said, you might have a better idea. So I'd have learning objective at the top, we are learning about capital letters, for example, and
Mhm.
then the instructions. And then at the bottom, you might have a better idea. And I taught the children what a learning objective was. We write them in every lesson, but we sometimes don't teach people what they are. And then taught them that they might have a better idea for meeting that.
Yeah.
And that was autonomy. But it was also useful for students who weren't PDA and had just had enough of the tutors that week. So you don't always need to know. But where you don't know, approaching it with curiosity is the way to go.
That's super, super helpful. So, which brings us really nicely onto the bit that we said that we were going to talk about next, which is kind of effective principles for teaching PDAs. So, are there any key principles that kind of underpin good practice for you?
Yes. The first one would be know your non-negotiables and keep them to a minimum. So a lot of, I hear two misconceptions that pull in opposite directions. So sometimes I hear you can't have any rules because the child's PDA.
Mhm.
And that doesn't always keep people safe. Because
Yeah.
we do need to have some rules about not climbing on high things, about not running across roads. We need to have some.
Yeah.
But I also hear he or she's just got to learn. These are the rules he or she's just got to learn. And those are misconceptions that pull in different directions. But what takes us back in the right direction is really thinking about which demands are non-negotiable. And when I talk with students, I talk about legal rules and safety rules. And most things that we insist on or need to insist on, most things we need to insist on are either to do with keeping people safe or are to do with following the law. And I depersonalize the demands. I blame them on the government sometimes or the health and safety executive. It's not my fault. The government say that you can't do this. The health and safety executive say that you can't climb on that. If it's not a safety rule or a legal rule, really question whether it's important. And then everything else can be negotiated around. Everything else is a thank you for telling me. I'm going to find out why you think that when everyone else has got started, or when this happens or when that happens. I'm going to find out why you think that. So that's the principle that underpins it, I think. Is it important? And if not, don't enforce it.
Fantastic. So that was principle 1.
Oh yeah, there might be more. I think there's also the relationship between the teacher and the student, which helps to model relationships between students and students. And I think the way we support PDA students needs to be more modeling than instructing. So with other children, you might tell them what you need to do to sustain a relationship. So you might say, you should say please and thank you. You should open the door for someone. You might give instructions.
Yeah.
But for PDAs, I think you model it. So instead of giving an instruction, say thank you.
Yeah.
Letting the child say thank you and then saying well done. I model it. I say, oh, thanks for doing that. That's really helped me out. Thanks for handing out the pens. That's really helped me out. I'm modeling it. I'm not instructing. And I think that sort of equal when some parents were first exploring PDA, went back in the 1980s, 1990s, when it was first being talked about. And Elizabeth Newson, the developmental psychologist who first identified it, was working. Some of the parents who took their children to see her said, it's like my child doesn't know they're a child. And I think you could spend 18 years teaching them the difference between a child and an adult, but then they've hit 18.
Then they'll be an adult.
Yeah, they've hit 18. That information is of no use to them. And you've wasted all the time that you could have spent modeling how we interact with people. in an equal way, because when you go into the workplace, you're not going to be telling people well done. You're going to be saying thank you. And so you need to model that relationship and work as far as possible on a presumption that you are equals. Unless someone's running across the road. But as far as possible on the assumption that you are equal.
That's really, really helpful. I'd never heard it quite phrased like that before. If our purpose in educating children is to support them to be successful adults, then actually kind of focusing on what they're going to need then is more important than focusing on what in this short period is what is expected of a child-adult relationship. And that's actually really useful, because a lot of the struggles that we see between adults and PDA kids are about that, like, don't you know that there's a hierarchy here because I'm a grown-up? And actually that is a ever diminishing day by day hierarchy.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating stuff. Thank you. So what doesn't work? What makes things worse?
It's interesting. In my research, a lot of parents have said traditional strategies made things worse. So what I was told to do as a parent by a health visitor or a parenting class or a parenting book, what I was told to do made things worse. Even strategies that are recommended to support autistic children in school or at home made things worse. And so I think because they're rooted in the wrong place, they're not rooted in autonomy, the strategies, they're not rooted in maximizing autonomy. A lot of the traditional teaching strategies and a lot of even those for supporting autistic students. So things like very clear instructions. And I was working in a class where 8 of the 9 children, when I was in the specialist school, 8 of the 9 children really needed clear instructions. That was what made them feel safe.
Yeah.
So it's not that clear instructions don't have a place, but it's being aware that that strategy doesn't work for the PDA in the room. And so they're going to need a pressure valve. They're going to need a release valve. Like you might have a better idea on the bottom of the clear instructions, or knowing that they can veto clear instructions and I'll come up with something else, or they'll come up with something else, even better. So clear instructions are not always a good thing. Similarly, very simple, direct language. And that can be when you're in conversation, but it can also be the visuals that are around the classroom. So if you have a sign up that says, look at the teacher, or good look. We used to have signs in my classroom that said sort of good looking, good listening, good sitting, which I think, I'm not sure how much they helped anyone actually in retrospect, but I think they particularly didn't help the PDAs, because it was just demands around my whiteboard, just stuck in pretty jaunty colours, demands around my whiteboard. So yeah, clear, direct instructions is not going to help. But you still want the listening, because you're modeling conversation. So it's about how you present that and being more collaborative in how you achieve that goal. And then rewards and sanctions, whole school behaviour systems with you'll get a sticker for this, you'll earn 10 points for that, depending on the age of the child. You know, people have stickers and points and house points. That system is rooted in the idea that someone's choosing. So when I was in my school as a child with the teachers in the gowns, then sometimes I was making a choice to not do my homework because I decided that a sleepover was more important. I was making a choice. So being told that there was a consequence for that choice altered the scales. So the choice was then homework or sleepover and detention.
Yes.
So it's changed the scales. But if I'm not doing something because it's causing me overwhelming anxiety, changing the
Yeah.
scales so that it's homework with overwhelming anxiety or no homework with a detention just makes everything a bad option.
Yes.
So if things are rooted in anxiety, those systems won't work, or they'll work at great cost to somebody. So they'll work at great cost to the PDA for a limited amount of time until someone breaks.
Yeah.
And that's what I see sometimes in kind of what we might call masking, where someone is trying to follow the demands more than they can actually tolerate.
Yeah.
And that's unsustainable long term. And that has had significant knock-on effects for the students that I teach in terms of their mental health and their ability to engage in education in the future.
Thank you. Right. So that's a lot of things that don't work. One of the things that we talk about a lot is that success in working with a PDA can come down to one kind of core thing, which is kind of the safety within your relationship with them. And I wondered if you've got any kind of real life examples or anything that you could pull on around kind of how you build that really safe, trusting relationship so that it works for everybody in it.
Yes. So 2 examples with the same student, I would say. So this is back in the specialist school, student on an individual program, but coming into the classroom sometimes. And the first thing was giving him a veto. So he knew that when I presented demands or instructions or suggestions, he had a ultimate veto. Unless it was a safety thing, come down from that high place, he could veto things. So he would go through his timetable in the morning. He'd come in a bit early. He'd go through his timetable in the morning and he would say, "Oh, you've put literacy first. I cannot do that. I cannot do that today." And then we'd have a collaborative conversation about that. So I was respecting his no, I was respecting his veto. I wasn't going to try and persuade him to do literacy. I wasn't going to say, "Oh, you'll really love it. We're doing this." Okay, you've told me you can't do literacy today. Thank you for telling me. Everyone's going to be quiet because it's literacy. What would make you feel comfortable in the classroom that is quiet? Pick one of your regulating activities that is quiet. So that's working for everybody. He's learning how to troubleshoot. He's knowing that I'm not going to make him do something he can't do on that day at that time. He trusts me. He learns to trust me that I'm not going to make him do something he can't do. But he's also learning to take into account his environment. People are quiet. I should choose something quiet, or choose somewhere to be. If I can't be quiet, choose somewhere where it's okay to be loud, that kind of thing. So having a veto, honoring the veto and being collaborative in the way that you troubleshoot builds a strong trusting relationship. And then also as a underpinning principle, I used to say, I'm in control of me, you're in control of you. Because one of the things that used to sometimes happen is because of the anxiety-driven need to be in control that people talk about with PDA, he would give me instructions or give the other staff supporting him instructions and could be quite assertive in those instructions because he needed a sense of control, I think. So we got to a point where I had we don't make people do things they don't want to do. I'm not going to make you do something you don't want to do. And you're not going to make me do something that I don't want to do. I mean, I was quite fun. I did most of the things, but but that was the kind of principle. And so that was a promise between us There's a promise between us. And I carried that into the alternative provision. I stuck it on the fridge. We don't make people do things they don't want to do. That's a promise from me to the students and a promise from the students to me.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we're kind of reaching the end of this section. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. This is the end of our Free for Everybody podcast. Claire is coming back to talk really particularly about EOTAS packages in our subscriber only section, which there should be details about in the podcast notes. And of course, should you need any support by anything raised in here, have a look on our website. There's loads of information on there. And if you can't find what you need, you can always ask the support service to help. Thank you very much. Take care, Claire.
Thank you.
So, if you want to hear more from today's special guest, then there is a longer version of this podcast available over on our Training Hub. Sponsors of our Training Hub make it possible for us to create and put out this podcast for everyone for free. As a thank you, they get free access to all recordings and self-guided training on our Training Hub. Thank you, subscribers, for your generosity. If you'd like to become a subscriber, there's a link in our show notes.